August is the month that most American gardeners spend maintaining what is already in the ground, deadheading, watering, weeding, doing all the things that the garden demands from the people who planted it. And somewhere in the middle of all that maintenance, the thought occurs, there has to be a better way. A way to have a beautiful garden without the garden having so much to say about how the weekend gets spent. A way to plant something once in a specific window of time and then simply watch it become more impressive every year without being asked to intervene. That way exists. It is not a gardening hack or a shortcut or a compromise between beauty and effort. It is the correct application of a specific category of plants, perennials, that are not merely low maintenance in the way that word is used to sell plants that still require significant annual attention, but genuinely self-sufficient plants that have spent millions of years of evolutionary time developing the root systems, the spreading mechanisms, and the adaptive strategies that allow them to handle everything a garden throws at them without human assistance. These are plants that get better when they are left alone, plants that respond to neglect the way most garden plants respond to care, with increasing size, increasing beauty, and increasing ecological richness every season they remain undisturbed. 11 of them are on this list. Every one of them goes into the ground in August, right now, in the warm soil that August provides, in the specific planting window that most American gardeners do not know exists, but that experienced perennial growers treat as one of the most valuable opportunities in the gardening calendar. And stay until the very end of this list, because the 11th perennial is one that takes 3 years to reach its full potential and then produces one of the most dramatic self-sufficient garden performances available in American horticulture for decades without a single intervention. That plant is coming. Stay for it. Plant 1, Rudbeckia, the golden colony that builds itself. Rudbeckia fulgida, planted in August, is Rudbeckia that blooms this fall, self-seeds before winter arrives, and begins the colony expansion process that eventually covers an entire bed with golden midsummer color, all from a single planting decision made right now. The warm August soil drives root establishment so rapidly that plants installed this month are producing flowers within weeks, behaving less like newly installed transplants and more like established plants that have simply moved to a new. Addressed to the self-managing quality of Rudbeckia that makes it the ideal lazy gardener's perennial is the combination of 2 expansion mechanisms that operate simultaneously without any input from the gardener. The rhizomes that spread horizontally through the soil from the central crown produce new flowering shoots at intervals, expanding the planting footprint every season. The seeds that the bird-attracting seed heads disperse through fall and winter germinate the following spring, adding new plants in the spaces between the rhizome-expanded crowns. In 3 to 4 seasons, a single Rudbeckia plant installed in August becomes a colony that fills an entire bed, not because the gardener divided it, replanted it, or did anything to encourage the expansion, but because the plant was left alone to do what it was designed to do. Smart gardeners know that the key to Rudbeckia's self-managing success is the specific inaction that most gardeners find hardest to practice, leaving the seed heads standing through winter. The seed heads that most gardeners cut back in fall cleanup are the seed dispersal mechanism that plants next year's expansion for free, the winter food source that brings goldfinches and housefinches to the garden through the cold months, and the overwintering habitat for beneficial insects whose eggs are laid in the pithy stem interiors. Every stem left standing is a contribution to next year's display, next year's wildlife activity, and next year's biological pest control, all at the cost of the one action that gardeners resist most, doing nothing. Plant 2, Echinacea, the taproot investment. That compounds Echinacea purpurea planted in August establishes the taproot architecture that makes it genuinely self-sufficient within a single growing season or the warm soil that August provides, accelerates root development in a way that cold spring soil cannot approach. And the plant that goes into the ground this month emerges next spring with a root system that has had an entire season of warm soil growth behind it. That root system is the investment that compounds. Every year the taproot grows deeper, accessing more stable moisture, building more energy reserves, producing more flower stems than the season before. The butterfly attraction that mature Echinacea produces in July and August, swallowtails, monarchs, fritillaries, and painted ladies treating the plant as a primary summer feeding destination. is the kind of garden animation that makes the yard feel genuinely alive rather than merely ornamental. A mature echinacea colony in peak bloom, covered in multiple butterfly species feeding simultaneously, is a garden feature that no annual planting can replicate and that requires no effort from the gardener to maintain. The butterflies find the flowers. The flowers produce the seeds. The seeds produce the next generation of plants. The gardener watches, the self-seeding, behavior that makes echinacea a genuinely expanding colony plant depends on the same inaction that Rudbeckia requires, leaving the seed heads standing through winter rather than cutting them back in fall. The seeds that a mature echinacea plant disperses in October germinate the following April and bloom the summer after that, adding new plants to the colony without any division effort, any replanting expense, or any work beyond the conscious decision to leave the garden alone through the winter months. August-planted echinacea reaches full self-seeding, maturity faster than spring-planted specimens because the warm soil establishment gives it a head start on the taproot. Development that produces the seed load that drives the colony. Expansion, plant. 3. Baptisia, the 3-season investment that pays forever. Baptisia australis is the lazy gardener's long-term investment, the plant that asks for patience through its first 2 seasons while it builds underground infrastructure that will then produce decades of completely self-sufficient above-ground performance. The gardener who plants Baptisia in August and gives it 2 seasons of establishment is the gardener who will have, by year 3, a 3 to 4 foot rounded, shrub-like perennial that requires absolutely nothing. No watering after establishment, no fertilizing, no dividing, no cutting back, no staking, no disease management. And that produces a spectacular May bloom of indigo blue pea-like flowers, followed by architectural seed pods that provide ornamental interest through fall and winter. Baptisia is a nitrogen-fixing legume, which means it hosts bacteria in root nodules that convert atmospheric nitrogen into plant-available fertility and release it into the surrounding soil as the nodules decompose. The Baptisia planted in August is not just planting a perennial. It is installing a permanent soil fertility system that will improve the growing conditions. For every plant in its vicinity over the decades, it occupies that location. The prairie origin of Baptisia, where it evolved in the lean, dry soil conditions of the American tallgrass prairie, means that it not only tolerates the lean soil that most gardeners try to improve before planting, but actively performs better in lean conditions than in heavily amended beds where excess nitrogen drives foliage at the expense of the deep root. Development that makes it self-sufficient. August. Planting gives Baptisia the warm soil. Establishment window that its deep root development requires. The taproot that makes Baptisia drought-capable and self-sufficient, measured in undisturbed prairie soil at depths exceeding 5 feet in mature specimens, begins developing immediately when the plant goes into warm August soil. By the time the first frost arrives, a Baptisia installed in August has a root system significantly more extensive than one installed the previous spring. That head start in root development translates into a faster transition to full self-sufficiency, a more vigorous second season above-ground display, and a third season bloom performance that makes the gardener who waited for this plant to establish forget entirely that there was a waiting period. Plant 4, catmint, the sprawling silver. Performer catmint, Nepeta X Fasani, is the perennial that most experienced gardeners consider the single most reliable, low-maintenance performer in the American garden, and the combination of qualities that earn that reputation is almost impossible to find in any other single plant. It blooms from late spring through summer in lavender blue flower spikes that make the front of any sunny border look designed and cared for. It handles drought with the indifference of a plant that evolved in the lean, dry conditions of the Central Asian steppes. It repels mosquitoes, attracts pollinators, and gets more beautiful every year it is left in place as the woody crown that accumulates with each passing season produces more vigorous growth and more abundant bloom than the year before. The August planting advantage for catmint is the woody crown development that begins immediately when the plant goes into warm soil. The crown, the woody basal structure from which all above-ground growth emerges, builds more rapidly in warm August soil than in cold spring soil, giving the August-planted catmint a head start on the crown mass that produces the following spring's vigorous bloom. A catmint planted in August often produces a small flush of lavender blue flowers in September of its first season, a preview of what it will deliver in full force the following June, and emerges the following spring with a crown development that makes it behave like a second-year plant in its first spring. The single maintenance task that catmint requires, and it is the only task it requires, is cutting back by approximately 1/3 after each bloom flush to encourage reblooming. This task takes 5 to 10 minutes per plant and produces a second wave of lavender blue flowers in late summer that extends the contribution of this plant through the entire outdoor living season. A catmint that is never cut back still blooms and still performs. It simply produces one extended bloom period rather than two distinct ones. For the gardener who wants maximum visual contribution with minimum intervention, the single annual cutback is the only action this plant ever requires. Here is the moment in this list to speak directly to the gardeners who are watching this video in August with full sun beds that have always required more maintenance than they deliver. In return, who have spent years watering, fertilizing, dividing, and replacing plants that reward that effort with adequate performance and nothing more. Every plant on this list was selected specifically because it rewards the opposite approach. Less attention, more beauty. The specific warm soil of August accelerates the root development that produces the self-sufficiency that makes these plants what they are. Drop a U.S. state or hardiness zone in the comments right now. Because gardeners in the same region watching this video are making the same August decisions, and the perennial choices that work in one zone 5 garden almost always work in another. Plant 5, Rudbeckia fulgida, Goldsturm, the named variety. That outperforms Goldsturm is not a different species from the Rudbeckia already discussed. It is a specific cultivar of Rudbeckia fulgida, selected for its exceptionally uniform, compact, and floriferous performance. Named and introduced by German nurseryman Karl Forster in the 1950s, Goldsturm has become the most widely planted black-eyed Susan cultivar in American horticulture for a single reason. It performs with a consistency and a reliability that the species type, variable from seed, cannot guarantee. Every Goldsturm plant produces the same mounded 18 to 24-inch form, the same golden yellow flowers with dark centers, and the same continuous August through October bloom that has made it the backbone of more American perennial borders than any other single cultivar. The August planting advantage for Goldsturm is identical to the advantage for the species. Warm soil accelerates root establishment and produces same-season bloom from a plant that goes into the ground now. But the cultivar specificity adds a practical benefit that the species does not provide. Because Goldsturm does not come true from seed, the gardener who wants to expand the planting must do so through division rather than relying on self-seeding. This makes Goldsturm the correct choice for formal borders where the uniform appearance of the cultivar is desired, and the casual self-seeding variation of the species type would create an inconsistent effect. The expansion of a Goldsturm, planting through division in August, taking the outer portions of mature crowns and replanting them in prepared soil, produces new plants from the parent's genetic material that will perform identically to the original plant 6, sedum, the drought-proof. Fall statement sedum, specifically the upright border sedums, including Autumn Joy, Matrona, and Brilliant, transforms the September garden in a way that no other late-season perennial approaches. The flat-topped flower heads that open in pink in late August deepen through rose, copper, and bronze as fall progresses, changing the garden's color character week by week in a way that feels seasonal and intentional. And through all of it, the heat of August, the transition of September, the cool evenings of October, sedum requires nothing. No watering, no fertilizing, no deadheading, no staking. The water stored in its own succulent leaf tissue sustains it through conditions that stress conventional perennials, and the flower heads that it produces without intervention are among the most sophisticated and most seasonally appropriate colors available. In the fall garden palette, August planting gives sedum the establishment window. It needs to bloom this fall rather than waiting until next season. A sedum installed from a vigorous nursery container in August has its roots in warm soil immediately, developing the root contacts that support the flower head production visible by September. The first fall bloom from an August planted sedum is not a compromised, establishing season performance. It is the full display of a plant that has found warm soil and expanded into it with the confidence of a plant evolved for exactly these conditions. The succulent leaf tissue that makes sedum so drought-capable through summer also makes it particularly forgiving of the occasional missed watering during establishment, sustaining the plant through the transition from pot to ground without the wilting stress that more water-dependent plants experience. Plant 7, daylilies, the division that establishes. Instantly, daylilies divided and replanted in August establish so rapidly in warm soil that they bloom the following season at full capacity, a performance timeline that spring-divided plants, working their way through cold soil establishment, rarely match. The fan divisions that are separated from mature clumps in August and replanted immediately produce new root growth within days in the warm soil, anchoring themselves and beginning the energy storage that will fund the following summer's bloom. By the time the first frost arrives, an August-divided daylily has a root system that has had the entire remaining warm season to establish months of warm soil growth that spring divisions do not. Receive the daylilies. Self-expanding quality, the production of new crowns. From the central clump that increases the bloom density and the visual mass of the planting every season is the characteristic that makes it the ideal lazy gardener's perennial for sunny locations. A daylily planting that is never divided expands outward from the original installation, producing more flowering scapes every year until the central crown becomes crowded and bloom density begins to decline, typically after 8 to 10 years in most American climates. At that point, the single division effort that restores full bloom capacity produces multiple new plants that can be replanted throughout the garden, expanding the planting at zero cost. One division effort, once per decade, is the entire maintenance requirement of a daylily planting that otherwise manages itself completely. Plant 8, Coneflower Magnus, the award winner that earns it, Hia Echinacea purpurea. Magnus's is the most decorated perennial in American horticultural history, the 1998 Perennial Plant of the Year selection that introduced a generation of American gardeners to the horizontally held, non-drooping petals and the extra-large flower diameter that distinguishes this cultivar from the species type. The horizontal petals that give Magnus its distinctive appearance are not merely an aesthetic preference. They increase the visual impact of each individual flower significantly, creating a bolder, more commanding garden presence than the reflexed petals of the species, which droop downward from the orange cone center. In the garden, Magnus reads as more designed, more intentional, and more impressive than the species, while requiring the same essentially zero maintenance. Like Goldsturm, Magnus's does not come reliably true from seed, making August division the correct method for expanding an established planting. A mature Magnus clump divided in August produces new plants from the parent crown that will bloom at full Magnus performance the following summer. The same horizontal petals, the same extra-large flower diameter, the same commanding garden presence. The division effort takes 20 minutes with a sharp spade and produces 3 to 5 new plants from a single mature crown, expanding the planting for free while simultaneously refreshing the vigor of the divided crown. Plant 9, Russian Sage, the silver architecture. That never stops a Russian sage, Perovskia atriplacifolia, is the perennial that landscape architects specify in their most visible projects and that residential gardeners discover and then immediately wonder how they spent years designing gardens without it. The combination of silver stems, silver-gray aromatic foliage, and the lavender-blue flower clouds that appear in July and persist through September creates a visual signature so distinctive and so beautiful that it reads as the deliberate choice of someone with serious design knowledge. In the lazy garden, it contributes this sophisticated presence without asking for anything. No watering after establishment, no fertilizing, no dividing, no deadheading. And it gets more impressive every year as the woody crown that accumulates with each passing season produces a larger, more architectural, more floriferous plant than the year before. August planting gives Russian sage the warm soil establishment that drives its woody crown development in the most favorable conditions available in the growing calendar. The crown that begins developing in August warm soil reaches a more mature state before winter arrives than a crown planted in cold April soil. And the plant that emerges from that first winter is more vigorous, more drought-capable, and more abundant in its first full season bloom than a spring-planted counterpart of equivalent age. The one annual task that Russian sage requires cutting back to 12 inches in late March's new growth emerges from the base of the woody stems is the single investment that produces another season of completely independent performance from the structural silver, framework that grows larger and more impressive. Every year it is left in place. Planty. 10. Ornamental grasses, the movement. That money cannot buy ornamental. Grasses planted in August produce their most significant fall display this season rather than next, because the warm soil that August provides accelerates root development in a way that drives vigorous above-ground growth through September and October, the months when ornamental grasses produce the seed heads, the autumn light-catching qualities, and the movement in the wind that make them the most valuable fall garden plants available. A grass planted in August in warm soil is not an establishing plant waiting for next year. It is a plant in active growth, producing the display that the gardener planted it to see. In the same season it went into the ground. Carl Forster feather reed grass, Miscanthus sinensis, Pennisetum alopecuroides. Each of these produces its characteristic fall performance from an August planting in the same season. The seed heads that catch the low October light with that characteristic luminous quality, the movement in autumn wind that creates a visual animation that no other garden plant provides, the structural presence through winter when everything else has retreated. These are qualities that an August-planted ornamental grass delivers beginning this fall, and that compound in scale and beauty every season the plant is left undisturbed. A grass that is divided unnecessarily or moved from its location loses the deep root system that produces the most spectacular fall performance. The grass that is planted once and left alone is the grass that becomes more extraordinary every year. Plant 11, the nuclear option, prairie dropseed, the 3-year investment. That pays for decades prairie dropseed. Sporobolus heterolepis is the plant that earns the last position on this list because it requires more patience than anything else here and delivers more in return than anything else here. And the relationship between those two facts is direct and non-negotiable. The gardener who plants prairie dropseed in August this year and maintains the planting through 2 quiet establishment seasons will have, by year 3, one of the most self-sufficient, most ecologically valuable, and most visually distinctive garden plants available in American horticulture and will continue to have it in increasing maturity and increasing beauty for the rest of their gardening life. This root system that prairie dropseed builds through its first 2 seasons has been measured in prairie restoration research at depths exceeding 8 feet in undisturbed prairie soil, a root infrastructure so extensive that it reaches the permanent water table in most American soil profiles, eliminating drought as a meaningful stressor regardless of surface conditions. In the years that research teams measured prairie dropseed root systems, they found the grass maintaining active growth through consecutive drought seasons that caused complete above-ground dieback in every surrounding species. It was not stressed. It was not dormant. It was growing normally from a water supply that existed entirely below the drought zone, accessed through a root infrastructure that took 3 years to build, and that no amount of irrigation or soil amendment could have produced faster. August planting begins this 3-year clock at the most favorable moment in the growing calendar. The warm soil of August drives the downward root development that is the entire point of the prairie dropseed's establishment phase. Roots follow moisture, and the moisture gradient in August soil directs roots downward more effectively than the cold, uniformly moist soil of early spring. The plant that goes into warm August soil is building the deep root system faster than the same plant installed in April, reaching the depth and the lateral extent that produces genuine drought independence in less calendar time. By year 3, the above-ground appearance transforms. The modest, fine-textured fountain of foliage that spent 2 years looking unremarkable becomes the designed, architectural, extraordinarily beautiful grass that design professionals specify, and that gardeners who have never heard of it immediately want to know the name of. The seed panicles that appear in late August are among the finest textured and most atmospherically beautiful structures in the American ornamental plant world, translucent in backlit conditions, fragrant with a warm coriander-like scent, glowing with the low angle of autumn light in a way that makes October the most anticipated month in the prairie drop seed gardener's year. 11 perennials. 11 plants that respond to August planting with a root establishment advantage that produces faster self-sufficiency, earlier bloom, and more rapid colony expansion than spring planting achieves. Every one of them gets more beautiful every year they are left alone. Every one of them is available at garden centers across America right now. The August window that most gardeners spend on maintenance is the August window that experienced perennial gardeners spend on investment, planting, the things that will take care of themselves while everything else requires taking care of. If this video helped, hit subscribe to join this gardening community and watch the next video on screen to keep building the garden that works harder than the gardener maintaining it.